Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Acclaim Amplify Asia podcast, where we unpack the ideas and changes shaping businesses in Greater China and the APAC region. I'm your host, Jacob Ketcher. So welcome back to another episode of the Acclaim podcast. Today, we're talking about a challenge that almost every business leader faces, which is to say, managing and hiring people. Building a business in Greater China definitely requires more than just money. You need a solid approach to HR. With local compliance rules changing and, AI reshaping how recruitment works, the big question now is how do you find, hire, and keep the right team? So to help us answer these questions, I'm joined by Thaddaeus Mueller, partner at FES Partners. Thaddaeus has spent over 2 decades working in talent acquisition and executive search right here in Greater China. Thaddaeus, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Jacob. Always a pleasure to talk to you and the colleagues at Acclaim.
So if we look at the big picture, China and Hong Kong's GDP is showing what looks to be pretty steady growth. But, recent reports, they show that only about 19 or 20% of local employers plan on increasing their headcount. So how do you see this kind of contrast? Like, what's the actual reality on the ground right now for executive recruitment?
Yeah, I think that gap between macro numbers and the hiring intent is a reality. And honestly, for us, it's puzzling. But it's really the defining tension that you hear in the market. The GDP growth in China historically has been driven heavily by manufacturing output, by exports, of course, but most importantly by state-led investment. So not by domestic consumption or foreign direct investment that usually for us translates directly into headcount growth. So when I speak to European Mittelstand clients these days who have WOFEs in Shanghai or Suzhou, the mood is relatively cautious. They're perhaps not contracting, but they're also not expanding. The reality of the 2010s, these years of 20% growth for everyone, they are over. So what we see much more in the market now is selective replacement hiring. So companies use a vacancy as a chance to upgrade that role. And of course, they are asking us very frequently for a confidential search and replacing a leader. So probably this 20% gap is about right. Companies are doing more with less, and the talent bar has actually gone up precisely due to that factor. And of course, the effects of AI might just strengthen that.
Yeah, and that caution, it seems to affect kind of candidates too, I mean, from what we've seen, the data shows that the number of professionals who are willing to take risks and actually switch jobs has dropped to around 20% now. I mean, when you're speaking with strong candidates today, what does it actually take to convince them to make that move?
Good point. Our work certainly got harder. Strong candidates today are not looking for a better salary. You could say they're looking for a safer bet and potentially a place where they have more freedom to develop according to what the market actually needs. So we've seen a shift towards risk avoidance and away from opportunistic job hopping ever since COVID. I think everyone knows that. And of course, at the same time, plenty of restructuring going on at multinational companies. So the instinct for a talent is to stay put.
Yeah.
I think what actually moves them is a combination of 3 things. Number 1, mission clarity. Number 2, access to owner. And number 3, trajectory.
Can you clarify what access to owner means? As in like proximity to the founder of the firm so they can have, a role in shaping the company rather than just merely working for this the founder.
I'll explain what that means, absolutely. Perhaps with an example. Owner access means they want to meet the actual decision maker and not only an HR colleague quite early in the process. especially if it's for a real leadership appointment. We had a search recently for a GM role in a German precision engineering company. They were expanding in China, and the candidate we placed turned down a higher base salary elsewhere because a member of the owner family from that German company flew over to Shanghai to personally meet him. So that gesture spoke volumes about how seriously that company took the hire.
Sure. So we've actually noticed a change in where companies place their teams. For a while, the focus was always on China plus one and moving operations to ASEAN. But lately, some businesses are actually coming back to the China mainland. Because I think a lot of them have realized that it's hard to replicate China's manufacturing strength and supply chain depth elsewhere. I mean, if companies are balancing both approaches, then what does that mean for where employees actually work? How does that change the kind of overall HR strategy?
True, yes. And especially if you look at the European, especially the German companies that have invested in Asia, largest concentration of their revenue and their profitability is from China. So I think that China plus one strategy is or has been useful for many of them, but you can't entirely turn away from developing your business in China further. So what we're seeing really is not a reversal that, companies abandoning the Southeast Asia idea they have started 4 or 5 years ago and going entirely back to China, but rather running like a parallel strategy. So they keep China for high complexity, high volume manufacturing and supply chain depth, while using Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia for cost sensitive or tariff sensitive production, or as a backup should something critical happen in the region. And of course, the HR implication for that is quite significant. You need to find a different leadership profile in each location. In China, you need somebody who can manage a real mature operation in the most competitive market in the world. Many China watchers, I heard Jörg Wuttke the other week, they call China the fitness studio of the world for good reasons.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, for an ASEAN investment, let's say a greenfield site, you need a real builder. You need somebody who's comfortable with ambiguity, with local government relations, with building teams from scratch. Very different skill set than what you need in China these days. And very few executives are strong in both of these fields. So the mistake I see, companies try to cover both with the same person, and that rarely works.
Yeah, I mean, like over the past 2 years, we've actually seen a massive explosion in generative AI integration across the region. I mean, in a market like China, where headcounts are rather tightly managed, how are companies using AI to, make hiring faster? I mean, are their systems doing most of the screening now?
Yeah, we're switching gears and talk a little bit about our overarching theme, AI. And of course, it plays a role in everything we do. I think it has genuinely changed this top of funnel for volume hiring, like screening CVs, parsing job descriptions, mapping skill sets, listening in, or even conducting candidate interviews and grading them. I've seen a couple of hilarious examples how this can go wrong. It's all over social media.
Yeah, somebody that like it sort of glitches and they ask the same question again and again, or
hilarious, yeah. But I mean, the efficiency increases there, and it will get better every day. It will never get worse than it is now. So
that's a good point. Yeah,
we have to take this into consideration, and there are companies in China, search companies out there that are entirely built on AI models, and it's impressive what they can do already these days. However, in our world of senior executive search, the impact is perhaps a little more nuanced. So what I see clients using AI for is market mapping, and they quickly identify who holds a particular role across a competitor company. And we use this every day ourselves. So you can build an entire long list within hours and not days. So that part really amazingly useful. But where it breaks down is context.
Sure.
So a candidate's CV might show you 20 years at a German automotive supplier in China. Great. But what AI can't tell you is whether they thrived or they were marginalized, whether they built a team or they inherited it, whether the company culture matches with the client. So that interpretive layer is still entirely human. Or if
and done over phone calls.
do it, it's more often wrong than right.
Yeah, sure. And like a lot of this is actually speaking to people on the phone and having conversations and getting to know candidates and getting to know the companies that you send into your clients, right? You can't just outsource that to AI.
But not only on the phone, you gotta meet in person. And I think that value of the personal interaction has increased dramatically ever since we've been starting to use AI. So it's funny, yes, we increase our efficiency all across the board, but we come back to something that we thought with COVID we would part ways with, the personal interview. But it's definitely more valuable than it has been ever.
Yeah. I mean, when you're looking at an executive level talent, there's probably a limit to what software can actually do. I mean, what is the one human element or soft skill that you think AI will never be able to spot during a search or an interview?
Yeah, we've been thinking about this a lot because, of course, everyone fears if, when, and where is AI going to replace your job. And we had a lot of discussion about this with our international network of executive search firms. And of course, everyone is discussing this. My answer to your question would be in this context of, hiring leadership for a German company in China or a Western company in China, that one thing that you can only spot in person, I would call this organizational courage. So that the willingness of the candidate to push back on a parent company in Germany or Switzerland when the China strategy is wrong. To say, sorry, this won't work here in a way that's credible, that's respectful, and that's ultimately heard. That quality is almost impossible to assess from a CV or sometimes even from a structured interview. You can only see this in the stories the candidate tells you about the moments where they took a stand. So I always ask a candidate to describe a time they disagreed with headquarters and what they did about it. And the answer to that question tells us more about the executive fit than anything else in the process.
Sure.
On top of that, Jacob, of course, is the personal relationship, what I mentioned just before. The best talents we speak to are currently employed and successful in their role elsewhere. So would they listen to an AI agent and agree to give up their years of long tenure at their employer to go for a competing offer? I think that conversation to convince them to go elsewhere still requires a personal interaction, at least until the robot are as perfect as we are in the conversation.
Yeah. I mean, if we look ahead, right, with technology changing, it feels like the rate of change has somewhat like increased in the last few years. What do you think is the single most important skill that companies should be hiring for? I mean,
it's probably too obvious, but the answer has to be EQ, emotional intelligence.
Especially with this AI stuff now. That's going to be the differentiator.
I think so. And reason EQ matters more today than 5 years ago is AI. It absorbs more of the analytical process, more of the process-driven work. But what's left, what the human still needs to do is to navigate relationship, to build trust across cultures, and of course make the judgment call in an ambiguous situation. And that's EQ territory.
Yeah.
I'll give you a concrete example. So we placed this finance director for a Swiss industrial client in Shanghai a couple of years back. So we had a really good shortlist. And I would say on paper, there were perhaps stronger technical candidates. But in the end, the Chinese talents that we were able to recommend, they had spent time earlier in her career as a Chinese expat in Germany. They even completed their university degree at a German university, so that the language skills on top. But that particular experience, being exposed to German corporate culture outside of their comfort zone, not in a Chinese environment, that had given her that inside-out understanding of how decisions really get made in a German organization, in a German Mittelstand corporate culture. And within 18 months, she had more credibility with the local leadership team than her predecessor had built in many years. So that's where we see emotional intelligence in action, and no algorithm found that talent for us.
Yeah. I mean, when clients come to Acclaim, they're often looking to set up a new presence or, expand an existing one, but launching a regional office can bring a lot more complexity. I mean, where do you see expanding companies making the biggest mistakes when managing people across borders? You spoke about that candidate who spent time in Germany, but what do you think are kind of some of the more common mistakes when managing people across borders?
It's a very complex area, so many mistakes can be made for sure. I have to say, however, that many of the clients we have the honor of working with are very experienced in that cross-cultural territory. So perhaps I give you just a more technical example for listeners to get some value out of. I think often companies that come new to Asia, to Hong Kong and to China, they underestimate this employment law gap between Hong Kong and between China and between entities. So company will hire a senior executive in their Hong Kong holding company on a Hong Kong contract. Fast and easy, simple and straightforward usually. But then perhaps this person is spending 80% of their time in Shanghai. And suddenly you have a tax exposure, you have social insurance question, you perhaps have labor law complications under the China employment law that nobody planned for. So we often work with the colleagues at Acclaim to find best solution for such a situation.
So to wrap things up, if you could point out the biggest blind spot a CEO or a founder has regarding their hiring decisions when planning a regional expansion, what would it be? I mean, what's the one thing that they assume that they have covered, but they usually don't?
I think that one is probably best answered by an old truth from Jürgen Kracht, the founder of Fiducia, and also in a way predecessor to our company FES Partners. I've worked with Jürgen for a long time, and he in fact just published a book. So that could be for another interesting podcast with Acclaim. Jürgen kept saying that the one thing you can't change with China is the language and the cultural differences you have. They will prevail over time. And of course, this is very important to take into consideration. Even if all your candidates and your whole organization speaks English, these cultural differences, they will always prevail.
Yeah. Thanks very much for your time today. I think it's been a fantastic sharing. Really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Jacob. It was great fun. See you again soon.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you to our listeners for listening into our Amplify Asia podcast. This podcast is produced by Acclaim, your trusted partner for corporate services across APAC. If you'd like to learn more or explore detailed information, visit us at china.acclaim.com. And if you need personalized support, don't hesitate to reach out. Stay tuned for more insights and updates, and see you in the next episode.